All right, good morning, Alta agents. This is Kevin Lauren. I'm the Director of Training and Marketing here at Alta Realty Group. And today we are going to be joined by Lauren Noack, and she's going to go through the changes in the C.A.R form. So, super important that we stay up on this stuff. We're lucky to have Lauren with us because she is a consummate professional and knows this stuff front and back. So, glad to have Lauren here. Bill Seitz, corporate broker, will not be joining us this morning. So we're going to go straight into this important webinar. So good morning, Lauren. How are you this morning?
Good morning. I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. It's always a pleasure. And we're lucky to have your uh, amazing brain to decipher these changes in these forms. So it's great to have you, Lauren.
Yes, thank you. I'm looking forward to it. Um, do you want me to jump right in, or do you have any updates or anything before we get started?
You know what? No real big updates. Just want to remind everybody that we do have a new corporate office. It's just down the street from the old one. So updated. um Information has been sent out to everybody. You can also just go on our corporate website, arghome.net. At the bottom, you can see the current office. And so that, and then also one little hiccup is when we changed the office, the phone line went down. And so that goes directly to Raquel Bauer. Unfortunately, that's still down as of this morning. So
No,
hopefully I'll
no.
have that. I know. Hopefully I'll have that troubleshot by the end of the day. But anyway, all good fun stuff, right?
Yeah, right. Just the day-to-day of business. So,
You know it. Another day in
right.
paradise.
Okay, great. So I'm gonna jump right in before I get into the new forms because the update for the new and revised forms, thankfully, is not super intense. There's not a whole bunch of like conceptual workflow kind of concepts. Bill and I were talking previously. We did want to touch on a little bit about compliance and some updates. So
Oh,
um,
good.
we want to make sure that we're all on the same page. So agents, if you have a TC, send this to your TCs as well. We want to make sure everybody is all on the same page so that we can get those CDAs released as soon as possible, and that we everybody kind of knows what we're looking for as far as compliance goes. So I just want to jump in. Let me share my screen here.
Perfect. No,
Um,
that's great. That's it. It's so important that everybody understands the workflow and everybody understands what's expected. When you set expectations the correct way, then things seem to move a lot smoother, right?
exactly, exactly. So let me share here. Just I'll walk through kind of the basics in sky slope as far as what we're seeing uh, from the compliance perspective and just to give you guys an idea of what we're looking for. So when you log into your SkySlope, this is typically the dashboard. A couple of things that we're running into. SkySlope has multiple elements to it. So you have SkySlope, that's the compliance element, the compliance dashboard. And then you also have SkySlope forms, and then you also have DigiSign, and you have all these other elements. So what SkySlope offers is a lot of times people will see over here on the left side the jumping to start a document, fill out disclosures, things like that. Just to keep in mind that this will then take you to the SkySlope forms section of SkySlope. And what we've been seeing happening is agents will be like, well, I have all of this stuff in SkySlope. And we're like, we don't see it anywhere. And it turns out they have all of the documents in SkySlope forms. And it's not actually in the compliance aspect of SkySlope. So keep in mind where you are at all times in within SkySlope. A good rule of thumb, this is the dashboard for if you see the Alta logo, you're in kind of the compliance section of things. If you're not entirely sure, you can always go up to this top right corner where it says apps. And when you click on that, this you'll see if you have the option to switch to SkySlope, then you're not in SkySlope proper, or the compliance aspect. So this is what SkySlope forms will look like. You'll see there's not the Alta logo. It's a little bit different coloring. And then if you go up to apps, you'll have the option to switch to SkySlope. So that's kind of one of the things that has been causing a little bit of confusion with agents. The other thing in general, the expectation for brokerage compliance purposes is that we need documentation uploaded best practice within 48 hours of it being signed, specifically your listing agreements, buyer representation agreements, purchase agreements. Not necessarily like 48 hours after you get, a disclosure signed, but just the main contracts. We need things started in the system so that we have them for auditing purposes, if we're ever audited, and so on and so forth. So it's really important that we get the documents submitted as soon as possible. Having said that, I want to also touch base on the difference between listings and transactions as they relate in SkySlope. So sometimes what we're also seeing is agents will open escrow on their listing and they'll be like, oh, shoot, I forgot to submit it while it was a listing, but now we're in escrow. It's now a transaction. It's no longer a listing. That's not the case. If you create a transaction for your listing, it's only going to provide the checklist and placeholders for escrow, the transaction aspect. There's not going to be anywhere for you to upload your listing documents or any of that paperwork that we also need. So what's been happening is that we've had to kick the whole file back. You have to cancel that file in SkySlope. You have to start it as a new listing, submit the listing documents. That has to get reviewed and approved. And then you can go back into the transaction or the SkySlope entry and accept a contract and open escrow from there. So again, if you have a listing, if you represent the seller at any point, you're going to always start it as a listing. You can do a listing and then right away go into a transaction and accept a contract on it, but you're going to always want to make sure you're starting it as a listing.
Great. And just real quick here, Lauren, can
Yeah.
everybody see Lauren's screen? Just making sure. So if somebody can just pop into the chat. Yes, we can see Lauren's screen. That'd be great. I think I was sent. Okay, good. Thank
Oh,
you.
good. Okay,
Thanks,
perfect.
Tanya. For some reason, I thought I was still sharing my screen. I was like, oh, no, wait a minute.
Oh,
Okay, good.
okay,
All right.
good. So,
Yay, Barney. Thank you, everybody.
thank you, thank you. Okay, so I'm just gonna jump in here, and we'll do kind of like a faux entry, assuming we're just on the buyer side of transaction. Um, so we'll just do everybody's favorite uh, 123 property. Let's do Sunset Boulevard. Who doesn't love that? Okay, you do, when you're inputting into SkySlope, the required fields are an MLS number and the year built. If it's an off-market property, this is not tied to MLS necessarily. You can link it to MLS and it will pull information from MLS for you. But a lot of agents have questions of, it's not on MLS, it's off market, it's a pocket listing, it's whatever. So you can just put NA or you can add in, TBD or things like that in order to move to the next section. And then the year built, and then the checklists for the property. The other thing to keep in mind is for some reason in SkySlope, there are some agents that have access to like some of the older checklists. So if you are going to select a checklist and you don't see any options that have the kind of M dash before the checklist names, reach out and let us know because it's kind of a glitch in SkySlope and we have to go through their tech support to get everything updated. You should be seeing a list of checklists available that have these kind of dashes in front of them. The exception being new home, commercial lease, and sale because those are default and I can't update the names to include the dashes. So just in general, most of them have those dashes. You know you're in the right place. The other element that we're seeing confusion with is when it comes to an exempt seller checklist. So we do have in parentheses here successor trustee, REO, and probate. Those are the only scenarios where your seller is exempt and you're dealing with an exempt seller. It doesn't matter if it's a living trust. It doesn't matter if it was purchased and flipped and the sellers never lived in the property. They're not exempt. They are exempt if they are a successor trustee that has not been the successor trustee for more than a year, if it's an REO property, or if it's a probate. Those are the only times you're going to be using the exempt seller. Everything else is going to be your standard sale, 1 to 4 units. And then obviously we have specific checklists for referrals, leases, vacant land, and then new home construction because usually those only require a few documents. So keep note the difference between those two main checklists. Purchase price, we'll make something up. Make sure that you're also paying attention to the contract acceptance date here, because you'll see it defaults to the date that you're creating this transaction, because in a perfect world, you're submitting this on the day that you get your signed contract. But if not, you can go in and edit it and say, actually, we accepted this back on Monday, and now I'm just inputting it here. The reason being is that we, for auditing purposes, we try to be reasonable in prioritizing the files that we're reviewing. If we understand that sometimes you get a 5-day escrow or a 7-day escrow. And so there's a fine line between the auditing process getting backed up because we have to review over 50 different documents in a really short time frame, and an agent that just kind of waited till the last minute to dump all the documents in. So we try to factor in, when was the contract accepted? What is a reasonable turnaround time? Is this a short escrow? We want to take that into account. And then also you have your expected closing date. The other thing here, escrow number, it says optional. Please note, for the brokerage, this is not optional. We need to have the escrow number in SkySlope, because what's been happening, sometimes escrow will send your commission check to the office, and we won't get a copy of the closing statement with it. They won't write the property address on it. All we have is the escrow number. And so we'll have to go into SkySlope and just search randomly for this escrow number. And so many people don't input this, one, because it's optional and you want to get through this process as fast as possible. Two, sometimes the agents don't know it. So they'll put TBD or 000, and then they won't go back and update it. So please note that filling out this information in as much detail as possible will help expedite getting you paid as well and helping the process on our back end. And we want to use Raquel and Legacy Escrow as much as possible. So make sure that we get those escrow numbers in there. Your source is required, office lead is required. Okay, your client contact information, obviously try and be as detailed as possible for your own clients. I also have him in here previously with all of his information. And if the your client or the party on the other side is an entity, is a trust, is, things like that, make sure that you input that information as the company as well. So it doesn't necessarily have to be an actual company. You can put the name of the trust or, the name of the estate or things like that as well. Okay. The agent on the other side, their information. And then I think you have to input at least a phone number for them. Everybody in this transaction has the same phone number. Okay, escrow title attorney, your primary contact. I know in Northern California and sometimes in Southern California, The title company will have an escrow division, and they will have their escrow officers. Title in Northern California will handle the escrow transaction. For our uniformity and ease of reference, we need to have information input as escrow as far as who is handling the money, who is the middleman. You may refer to them as title. We're not an attorney state, so don't worry about that. But this is where we're going to look if there is a question about commission, if there is a delay in the commission amounts. If the broker needs to reach out, we need to have this escrow information. So this is where we're going to look. You may reference it as title, but we're going to look in escrow. So make sure that you have all of that information in there for our compliance purposes. Okay. Obviously, as a transaction coordinator, I definitely suggest having as much detail and information in here as possible, and that you always do use a TC. And you can input their information here, or you can also input them, I'll show you later, as a miscellaneous party as well. Purchase price, your commissions. I don't know why it always makes you have a listing commission, even if you're on the buy side and you don't know what it is. You can put 0, that's fine. Commission notes, deductions. If you know when you're inputting the file what any of those are, please input that. But a lot of times people don't have this information until later. We don't hopefully deal with the earnest money from that brokerage perspective, but you can input that information as well. And just see here. Okay, so you've created your transaction. It's going to pop into, it'll look like this with your checklist. These are all of your placeholders. Now, as far as the process for submitting your files, the ideal scenario, and we do know every file is different, every party on the other side, every client, every agent, everybody's different. The ideal scenario that we're all striving for here is to upload your documentation 3 to 4 times throughout the transaction. So your first time, your initial input is going to be the contract. If you're representing the buyer, obviously your buyer representation agreement as well. This bulk of information we want to have uploaded so we can review it. And this will be your first initial submission for documents. We also strive within 48 business hours of you uploading documents that they'll get reviewed. That is what we are striving for. Once we review this documentation, it may trigger additional items in this checklist to be required or not applicable. So sometimes agents will be frustrated of like, that wasn't on the checklist before. This is fluid. This is going to be constantly changing and updating. You may upload, you may have an offer that is a conventional offer, and then you make a change and it becomes an FHA loan, and you now have to trigger your FEAC document and your HID document. So this is going to be fluid, but initially we want your contract initial documents here. MLS, if it's an off market, you can just add a note that it's not on the MLS. But the MLS and the tax data are often left off initially. This is really important from a compliance perspective because we have not been to the property. We don't know a lot of things, and we need to reference it from the MLS and the tax data. We can tell how many owners, we can tell if it's into trust. If it's off market, we can reference the tax data to see what year it was built, and if that might trigger other documentation that's required, so on and so forth. So the MLS will tell us if there's solar, if there's an HOA, if there's all of these other little things that we need to know that will then trigger additional documentation. So please also include that as well. The other thing that gets left off a lot is the lender pre-approval letter and the verification of funds. These 2 items are by default in the contract attached to the purchase agreement. We need to have them in there. We need evidence that they were provided. The contract says they were there. We need to have copies of them. Make sure you're giving them to your TC so that they can then upload them as well. If it's an all cash transaction, you just need to upload the proof of funds into the pre-approval letter spot, and we'll go ahead and remove the requirement once we're reviewing for the additional down payment aspect. Okay, so you upload all that initial stuff, it gets reviewed, great. Then throughout the transaction, you get the opening escrow package, maybe you do the home inspection, you get your prelim, your NHD report, these items, you upload those kind of initial documents. We can then cross-reference on the escrow instructions that the people signing the contract are actually the right people, and verify that with the prelim. So although there are a lot of documents that we're asking to have uploaded, they're all being cross-referenced and they're all being verified to make sure that everything that is documented is accurate and lines up. So this would be upload 2, escrow instructions, reports, maybe not even repair requests. If you're still negotiating those, fine. This will be section 2. Then the third element is going to be when you have your signed property disclosures. A lot of times you're going to be able to upload what the seller provided you, and then you're just going to be waiting on your own avid if you're representing the buyer. But again, the sooner you can get that, please do your avid at the home inspection so you can get that done and sent off and signatures collected as soon as possible. Upload all of this documentation. At this point, if all of these documents are uploaded and they are complete and signed, you can get a CDA. It can be 17 days after escrow opened on a 30-day escrow, and you can get a CDA. That's kind of what we're looking for in order to release it, these main elements. Another kind of quick tip as far as the documentation goes, some agents are not aware that you can actually drag and drop documents into these placeholders. So you can take, a document and just drag and drop and it'll upload. You don't have to hit attach and then, kind of the long way of having to go through and upload each document. You can drag and drop. If you have a couple of those documents, you want to add them in there. Super handy. We love that. The other thing that you can do, obviously, is keep the email address for the transaction. If you're using a transaction management system, you can add this as a contact. Always just keep that email address, and it will take the documents in the email threads and just dump them into this documents tab. So you'll always have that. You'll always be able to make sure that conversations, emails, everything is getting added into this document list. The other thing is adding in the bundled documents. So for example, you get that initial contract, you get the initial disclosure package that's all signed, and then there are all these individual placeholders, and so some agents get frustrated with that as well. SkySlope does a pretty good job of letting you know when something needs to be or can be broken up if it notices that there's an upload. But you can upload just the full package, and then you can go to split, and it will use its AI magic, split up the documents, assign them where they think it needs to go. But please verify, because it is not always correct. Sometimes you need to merge things together. Sometimes you need to rename things. What's one of the things that always gets confused? The BHAA form, so the homeowner association advisory, and the buyer homeowner insurance advisory. It'll mix those up sometimes. Or sometimes it will only incorporate, maybe your SPQ is, you have 4 pages, and it will only put 3 in there, and then you will be missing a document. So we want to make sure that you're paying attention. Don't always trust the AI. Put my tinfoil hat on. Always verify this information. You can cross-reference it, and then you can split it and assign it, and it will go in and add all of the documents to the checklist. And that's also super easy and helpful as well. And you can see, boop, boop, it'll add all that stuff there for you. that's a really quick and easy way to be like, oh, I'm missing this one document. Let me drag and drop it in. Okay.
And Lauren, is there a
Yeah.
way, we have a question from
Sure.
Tanya. Is there
Perfect.
a way to print that checklist? Like a,
There is not.
I
Um,
didn't think so. I think the only thing that you could probably do, Tanya, is just take a screenshot, right?
you could, I do have to update it, but there is, if you go into your dashboard, they move this around all the time here. If you go into, oh, I think it's more. Okay. So if you go into the dashboard, you click on more for SkySlope, your transactions, you click on working documents, and then it'll take you to your personal docs, but you want to go to this tab up here that says office docs, and you'll actually see a PDF of the checklist that we have for some of the different units. This is also where you'll be able to find the Alta W9, and also where you'll be able to find the Alta affiliated form as well. And this is a fillable PDF, so you can download it and fill it out with the property address. So this is where you'll
Awesome.
find some office documents.
Cool.
Okay, and then finally, some of the things that we're seeing causing CDA delays. I mentioned the Avid. We cannot release the CDA if we don't have your Avid specifically. So again, on the buyer side, we see this delay a lot. If you're having issues with the agent on the other side or delays in getting things, we also accept 3 documented requests for the items. So if you upload 3 emails of you asking the other side for it, cool, we'll sign off on it. That satisfies the compliance and the DRE requirement. Um, the other thing is that sometimes agents won't upload these reports until later on because it's at the end of the checklist and they, um, you know, just do it in order that they see the items on the checklist. When we get the NHD report, that may trigger the FHDS, the fire hardening and defensible space. Um, there are additional reports and requirements and clearances that come along with that. Same thing with the MLS. On the MLS and also on the SPQ, there is information about solar. And so we may not know if it's an off market property, and then we don't get the disclosures uploaded until the last minute. On the SPQ, we see, hey, there's solar. Now we need the solar disclosure advisory and the questionnaire. So that gets kicked back and that gets delayed. Those are 2 very big disclosures that are not just like a sign off advisory or something we can collect later. Like these are substantial disclosures that we do need in order to release the CDA. So keep that in mind. The other thing is the home inspection or the buyer inspection waiver. A lot of times, especially Northern California, seller will provide a home inspection report to the buyer on the MLS or prior to acceptance, they'll have the report done. If the buyer is accepting a report provided by the seller, we still need the buyer inspection waiver form. The buyer is waiving their decision to get their own independent third-party inspection, and they're accepting one supplied by the seller, whether that's one the seller paid for or whether that's one that it came from a previous canceled escrow that previous buyer had, and the buyer's like, yeah, we'll take this one instead of paying for another one. You still need the buyer inspection waiver. So keep that in mind. And then the final kind of biggest thing is commission confusion. So there are a lot of times where the commission instructions uploaded don't match the documentation we have. And it's because there was a price change on the request for repair, but that hadn't been uploaded. There was an adjustment on your buyer representation agreement of what your commission you're accepting, and that wasn't uploaded, right? And so some of those things don't line up, and there's a lot of confusion about, excuse me, what the commission is or should be. So I want to make sure, most importantly, that everybody is really clear on where, for us as an office, look for commission information to put onto the CDA. It's in the commissions tab. This is where, again, we're going to cross-reference these details. So all of this information on the commission tab, this is what you're going to input when you first input the file, right? And a lot of times all of this changes, it gets updated. The only thing that might stay is like if there's a referral, right? You'll know that going into it. But there are credits, there are changes in commission, there's changes in price. When you feel like you're ready for a CDA or you're getting close to closing, or if ideally, as soon as any of these changes occur, make sure you're updating this information on the commission tab. Again, I know it's kind of out of sight, out of mind because it's all these back tabs, and a lot of people just focus on the checklist, but keep this updated. One of the best aspects that you can do is adding in additional commission information. So if you're like, I'm going to pay the $45 overage for the home warranty, or I'm splitting it 60/40 with my teammate, or make sure whatever other weird commission information you want to make sure that we know so that we can update the CDA accurately. You can add a comment. This is a comment, and you save it. It will add a note, and then you can say, you can update it. And you can add another one, and it's going to keep, the order that you're submitting things. So I will always look here and reference this for any of that information. And then finally, this commission breakdown. This is great for TCs. This is great for agents as well. If you're like, I want to be paid in my corporation, you can put the name of the corporation and what your commission amount should be. And you can say, the advantage. And you can also, instead of putting, you have the option address, phone, fax, please wire directly. You can add that information in there. And then it will automatically add a second line. And you can put, whatever their address is. Address, wherever you want it mailed, right? So you can continue and add as many lines here as you want. This is ideal for us when we're creating CDAs. We can see how do you want your commission delivered? How much is your TC going to get? Because a lot of times what happens is when TCs are filling out the file, they'll go up here and they'll put the TC fee, admin brokerage fee, and they'll put their name, but really the client's paying the TC fee. Or this section gets used and interpreted a lot of different ways for a lot of different parties. So to make sure, again, everything is uniform, we want to make sure that we're utilizing this commission breakdown section, and that will clarify really easily. If there's no TC fee listed here, I'm not going to pay the TC on the CDA, even if their information is up here. The other big thing too that I'll add to add into your commission information that's been causing delays or confusion, for right now, the best solution for this is if you guys want to utilize your loyalty points. We're seeing a lot of revisions to CDAs, or, oh yeah, what about this? Or, oh, I forgot I wanted to utilize my loyalty points. Add that here in a comment so that we can then all get on the same page about what's available and know that you want to utilize it. Okay, I'm getting off my soapbox for SkySlope. Are there any other questions about this aspect of it that people have or are confused about or want to bring up? We can also circle back to that as well. Okay, moving on.
Looks like we're good for now.
Cool. Okay. So again, a lot of information. Go back and watch the recording, forward it to your team, your TC, if they aren't available to watch it, because it's important information to have and to reference. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the new and revised forms. And just as a refresher on where you can find this form update through C.A.R is when you log into their C.A.R website, you go to the Transaction Center, and then you click on Standard Forms. You'll then have a hyperlink here for forms revisions and new form releases. And you'll see the most recent here is December. This is the one we're going to be talking about. And this will give you all of the red-lined copies of the forms that are being updated or revised, and will also give you copies of what is going to be released. And these come out before the actual release date. So as TCs, we love jumping in here and seeing when we have the new information, the most updated stuff. And then, as always, you'll be able to get a quick summary guide from C.A.R. And this is what that looks like. And it is a breakdown of every form, what was updated. A lot of these updates were just conforming updates or minimal revisions that don't require any kind of like new learning. So this looks daunting, this long 6-page list of forms. And in fact, there's a total of 55 forms that were, I think, are included on this long list. But this is great reference to get kind of an overview of what's being updated. And then sometimes, especially with this release too, they'll also include additional documentation. There's a new form that we're going to touch on that's talking about referral fees and the realtor disclosure and acknowledgement. And that will give you this kind of Q&A form for quick reference on really going into detail about a specific release or an element of a release. And in this case, the referral fee disclosure and this form. So I highly recommend that you guys check this out again through C.A.R. And as always, if you prefer an alternative method to learning that isn't me talking at you, you can also view the C.A.R webinar where they go through all of this information. And again, that's under Transaction Center. You click on Risk Management. You go down to the Legal Live Webinars. And this is where you will see all of the information. This is their most recent webinar, will always be up here. This is all the new laws that came into effect this year. Super informative. You can watch the instant replay. Then down here, they have all the webinars that they've recorded on all kinds of things. And not only can you go back and watch the webinar, but you can also get the PDF of the slides. You can view the slides. This is super helpful information. And so you can view the new and revised forms webinars here as well. Okay, so, and again, just kind of a reminder, the forms are revised and released typically twice a year in June and in December. And so this is the December update. I am going to change the screen that I'm sharing. Oh, okay. I also updated in the chat. I put together sort of a quick reference guide of the ones that we're going to be talking about today. Again, they've revised or addressed a total of 55 forms. So we're only going to be talking about a few of these that are really ones that you're going to be encountering or that are important to know about. And I dropped this in the chat. So if you scroll up to the very top, you'll see this as a PDF as well. That's quick reference. And it also has hyperlinks to the update and then also to our website as well for the TC Advantage, because I don't think I did a formal introduction. I know Kevin gave a little bit of an update. I do the auditing and the file compliance, and I do have a transaction coordinator company, the TC Advantage, and I'm C.A.R certified as a forms trainer and as a transaction coordinator as well. So we see a ton of transactions, all kinds of situations. Even if you don't work with us directly as your TC team, I'm happy to answer any questions or refer you in the right direction for transaction questions that you might have. Okay. The easiest way, I think, to do this instead of like a fancy slideshow, I'm just going to show you the actual documents, the PDF versions of them, and kind of go through element by element here. The first one, this is the brand new form. This is the RAD form. It's sort of a new form in that previously there was an RA form in the C.A.R library that was just the realtor acknowledgement. And that's basically these first two paragraphs of saying, I am a realtor and this is my association. And If you're having an issue in a transaction, you can reach out to me. You can reach out to my broker. My broker's information is down here. Or you can reach out to my local association. Here's my local association. The default obviously being that you're a realtor, but you can check a box if you're not. But basically, this is just saying I need to abide by the code of ethics and these DRE regulations. And here's all the information that you may or may not need. This comes into play when we're talking about the second half of this form, which is the sort of other disclosures. And this is in 3 parts. So, one, you would utilize this if you're receiving compensation from multiple sources. And all of these elements are really vague, and I'm not a super fan of this form. People are going to be kind of confused by it. But when in doubt, disclose. So, I feel like we're going to be utilizing this form a ton, but it's not a statutory form. So, keep that in mind as well. Compensation from multiple sources. What does that mean? If the seller is paying your compensation and the buyer is paying your compensation, that's coming from multiple sources. So it can be multiple different scenarios, excuse me, that would apply to this compensation from multiple sources. But it does say on here, if not already disclosed in agreements signed by my client or otherwise. So for the most part, if you have a buyer representation agreement and the seller's only covering some of it, your buyers signed the purchase agreement and they've signed the representation agreement, so they've already know you're getting compensation from multiple sources. And that's not really necessary. So that's 3A. 3B is, again, super, super vague. This is when the agent, you as the realtor, need to disclose ownership interest in the property. So a lot of times this is if you are selling your own property. And if you are, maybe related to, a lot of times agents will throw this in the avid or they'll throw this in a counteroffer or, agent is licensed or whatever the case is. This gives you sort of that long list. But it's also super vague in the sense that you can check a box that says, I'm disclosing that I'm selling or leasing a property or contemplating a purchase or lease of a property on behalf of myself, a member of my immediate family, the brokerage firm identified below, or any broker or agent thereof, an entity in which I or my immediate family member have a legal interest, right? So if that's your trustee of a trust, and an administrator, so on and so forth, or other person related by blood or marriage, or any other person with whom I have a special relationship. What is a special relationship? That is open to interpretation. Can be your boyfriend, girlfriend, fiance. That can be, I don't know, is that your PE teacher from high school that I mean, like, who's to say what your special relationship is, right? So, again, when in doubt, disclose, and it's really not specific on what the definition of that term special relationship is. So keep that in mind when you're checking boxes and filling out all of that information. Okay. The third part of this form, and the one that you're going to see incorporated and utilized most often, is talking about referral fees. The reason being is that they've updated the listing agreement, the buyer representation agreement. They've bundled this form with the referral fee agreement, to utilize this form anytime there is a referral or a fee paid out to the agent. And you check that box and you just very clearly disclose you're receiving compensation or you're paying out compensation. That would be in the sense of when you're giving a referral to another agent. And what that compensation amount is. Why they didn't just add a client signature on the bottom of the referral fee agreement, I have no idea, but here we are. Is disclosing the receipt of referral fees legally required? Yes, it is. An agent must disclose all things of value received. This is just a way a CYA making sure it's documented, making sure it's in writing. Additionally, the DRE also requires that real estate licensees disclose the receipt of referral fees to their clients anytime those fees relate to the client's transaction. Okay. You can also utilize this multiple times throughout a transaction. It doesn't necessarily need to be numbered because it's not in a chronological order or one canceling out another, but you may work with your buyer because you received that lead through a referral. And so you have your buyer sign this form and check 3C. Here's all the referral information that I'm receiving. And then you go through the transaction, and maybe it's a situation of one of the most common applications for 3A would be if sometimes agents will receive a bonus commission. If you close by this date, we'll give you a commission bonus. The seller will pay this additional commission bonus. So it's not necessarily the seller providing compensation as part of what the buyer's obligation is or covering the buyer's obligation. This would be like in addition to. They're also getting compensation from the seller, and they're also getting compensation from the buyer via the BRBC. So that may come into play on a specific transaction. You would utilize this form again. So you may have multiple versions of this form within a single transaction or within a single client relationship. Again, it's a new form. There's going to be a ton of questions. It's not a statutory form. It is optional, but know that this is an option and is available to you. Okay, that leads us to the referral fee agreement form. They have reformatted this form again to try and clarify and make it easier to receive and understand. As far as a while ago, they updated the terms of the referring broker and the representing broker because there was a lot of confusion with receiving the referral. Is that you're receiving the referral money or you're receiving the referral contact? So they changed those terms. You now have the referring agent and the representing agent. So who's going to represent the person, who's referring the person. Note here in 2A, the default here is for only the first property transaction specified is where this referral fee applies. That doesn't mean if you go into a transaction and then that cancels and you go into another transaction, you don't owe the referral fee on it because it also explains here that compensation is due upon closing. But a situation where you want to be careful when you're receiving and even filling it out is you may get 2C checked, which says for any and all property transactions specified during the term of this agreement. So you may get a referral for a client to sell their property, and you're paying out on that transaction when the client sells their home. Then 3 months later, the sellers come to you and go, you know what? We loved working with you. We want you to help us buy a referral property. Investment property. If the 2C is checked, you will also be obligated for transactions that fall under this referral, right? Let me clarify that. They sell their property and then they say, we want you to help us sell our investment property. So the box is checked to sell a property, and you've done that initial transaction and you've sold their one property and you've paid out that referral fee. Well, maybe now you also have to pay out another referral fee for when you help them sell their investment property 3 months later because 2C is checked. I hope I didn't just confuse everybody on that. But be careful of this section 2 and the boxes that are checked. The default is that it's just the initial transaction. And then if you establish a relationship with these clients and they use you again and again, that you don't owe a referral fee for that. But be careful when receiving it. If that box is checked, you may be required to continue paying out that referral fee. Okay. The RAD form that we just talked about is also bundled together with this. So, and it shows you down here that they're going to have to sign off on that as well. The next form updated is the RLA, the listing agreement. Like I mentioned, they also added this checkbox. If the broker's paying a referral fee, you check that box and it will automatically incorporate the RAD form. The other thing that was updated has to do with the new law that came into effect this year about digitally altered images. I know this has been everywhere every time you log into MLS. It's super important when talking about any images for marketing purposes for your properties and your transactions. Um, and this just gives an explanation, right? So anything that's like your AI staging is going to be the most common and the biggest one. If you're removing a light pole from the front photo or your for sale sign or whatever, that's a digitally altered image. And you are going to now have to include either the original image in that same lineup of photos. So like here's a photo of this empty home and then here's a photo of it staged, right? You have to have those together, or you have to provide a public link for all of the original photos. And you have to make that available and upfront. Uh, Digital alterations that don't count are things like cropping or adjusting the color, things like that. That doesn't apply. But kind of blatant altering of these images is what this is talking about and what the law talks about. Okay, other updates to the purchase agreement. What has been happening is that sometimes when buyers write an offer, they don't check the box for the TOPA form, which is the tenant occupied property addendum. Or they think, oh, well, we're receiving the property vacant. The tenants will be moved out, so we don't need to worry about it because they're not staying with the property. C.A.R needed a way to still disclose and incorporate the notice that it's still subject to tenants' rights, even if that TOPA form is not included. But again, as a reminder, if there are tenants on the property, even if the property is being delivered vacant, even if the tenants are the ones purchasing the property from the property or the housing provider, you still need this TOPA form. Okay, the other update that they added was kind of clarification for the exempt sellers, which we talked about, successor trustee and the REO or the probate. Previously, it had said that if they're exempt from the TDS, they can complete the ESD form, which is the exempt seller disclosure. And then they just added the option that you can still complete the seller property questionnaire. If they have a little bit more information, if they want to um, uh, have extra coverage, because the ESD form is just the first page of the SPQ. So if they want to fill out the SPQ, they can, but it's not contractual. Okay. And then 11E, this also has been added in for the new law that came in effect, is notifying the buyer that they have the option, or they advising them that the seller is advising the buyer that they should get an electrical inspection. And it kind of goes into all of those details as well. They also, you'll see they added in this Fair Appraisal Act notice, and then this federal reporting requirement. They have last update in June, they added this FRAA form with the purchase agreement bundle. You're not going to see that anymore because they've added those elements into the purchase agreement. That was kind of a temporary form. So this is what the red line information is. They just shoved it into the contract. So we have even more information in here. And then you'll also notice that they took the arbitration and liquidated damages section and put it right before the signature pages because it was like the second to last page in there and that didn't make sense. Also, they moved the section for offer not accepted. I think previously it was like right after or in between. It was in a weird spot, and people kept initialing it thinking it was the presentation of offer, or they were initialing it by mistake. They moved it to the very, very bottom. If the seller is not going to accept the offer, they can initial it. It's at the very, very end of the contract. Okay, seller property questionnaire. This section up here, this section 5, they've actually, this is a very broad question of, is the seller aware of any reports, inspections, disclosures, warranties, maintenance recommendations, estimates, blah, blah, blah. If a seller would check yes, then they would try and list all of this information in this little 1.5-line explanation. They have now added this section saying you can use the receipt for reports to reference these documents instead. I wish there was a checkbox that says see receipt for reports for this information, but that'll probably come out later in an update. You can then list all of that information, and we'll look at the receipt for reports next, but this is an option. They don't have to fill out all this information. If there's a ton of stuff they have, you can use the receipt for reports. Okay. There were changes then on the SBQ that were also required by the Civil Code, and these are these two in section 17 and 18. 17D asks the seller if they're aware of any local requirements or restrictions for gas-powered appliances. In the sense of replacing them, you have to replace them with electrical appliances. There are some local areas throughout the state that have those requirements, so make sure that you are understanding if you're representing a buyer. That might be something to look into or to know or to check this question to see if the seller is aware of any of those restrictions. And then 18B asks if the seller is aware of any residue that is left from smoking tobacco, nicotine in general, including e-cigarettes and vapes. The question before it asks if anybody was smoking on or in the property. And then the second one goes a little bit further in depth of, is there any residue? So there may be a smoker that only smoked outside, so there's not residue. I don't know. It's required by civil code. That's what these additional questions are for. Okay. I know I'm going super fast on these as well. London, talking about removing objects, Christmas decor, you're talking about digitally altering images. Yes, that would apply. You would need to provide the original image or a link to the original image. On the RAD form, you mentioned we could use that multiple times. You use a fresh form each time during the transaction or the same form and initial the update. You would use a new form. So you would have a version that is talking about the referral fee, and then you would have a version that is talking about compensation from multiple parties, and then, so you may have 2 or up to 3 or up to 4 if you want to use it initially to disclose that you're a realtor, and then you go on and on and on. You could have a ton of them. If a new form, then do you mark all that apply or only the update? You would mark only the update, or if you know multiple things apply, you can check for multiple situations. If you just have the one form, you can check all that apply. It's more if it comes into play later on. So you would just have a version for the new element that applies, if that makes sense. Okay. Okay, perfect. You're welcome. Okay, receipt for reports. Okay, so they updated this, made it a little bit more easier to understand. The section 4 is for reports that apply or were ordered for this specific transaction. So let's say, for example, the seller had the termite inspection and the seller ordered the prelim and the NHD report, and they use this. they're the ones that ordered it. They check S for seller. They provide this to the buyer. What is really helpful is on the buyer side of things. Let's say you are an agent or you have a buyer that does a lot of different inspections. I have an agent, every transaction, he does a sewer inspection, a roof inspection, a pool inspection, an electrical inspection, all of these different inspections for all these different people on behalf of the buyer. They get all of these reports done. The buyer is required to provide copies of the reports to the seller. And so using this receipt for reports kind of keeps things organized and allows you to document how they were shared, when they were shared, what they are, who ordered them. And again, this is just for this transaction. And it tells you up here in section 1 who is being provided these reports. So the seller may be provided these reports that were ordered by the buyer. You may have one version of this receipt for reports for that. Then vice versa, the buyer is going to be receiving these reports that were ordered by the seller. I wouldn't combine them both onto one document. I think that would just make things kind of confusing. I would keep things separate, buyer and seller. But this, again, is for this specific transaction. Now, in section 5, this is for reports from a previous purchase or transaction or that seller has. So this is very broad and all-encompassing for if it was previously in escrow and the transaction canceled and the seller has the inspections, the 17 inspections done by that buyer, and they need to pass them along, they would not go up here if the seller is providing these reports from a previous canceled transaction to the buyer, would not go up here because they were not ordered for this specific transaction. They were provided from previous transactions. And this is where you would fill out that information. If the seller purchased a property and a year later they're selling it and they have all the disclosures in the reports from when they purchased it, which everybody should and also should still provide, you can list that here. That's where all of that information would go. So this is from the seller to the buyer for all of those previous things. This is any previous notices that they've received, any information whatsoever that the seller has that would be a material report or item that the seller wants to provide, a repair invoice, anything like that. This is where you would put that on the receipt for reports. And then they had on the previous version, it was like, oh, they put the seller signature in between these two or something stupid, but now it's all down at the bottom. Makes a little bit more sense. Okay. I know our time's up. I'm going to rush through these last few here. The solar disclosure, this form has been updated. I think we're on like version 5 since they released it, but we're getting better. I think we're getting more clear. It's the FHDS form that's still miserable. Okay, so the solar, the first page of the solar, because remember, this is a solar advisory and a questionnaire. It's 2 things in one. The advisory element is on the first page. All of the advisory stuff, this applies to both buyer and seller. So all of this information is on page 1 for both buyer and seller. Then they added clarification on how to fill out the questionnaire that follows. And they also added up here language that reflects like evolving elements in the field, right? So sometimes there are updates to the transfer or things that happen with like a power purchase agreement or things may change, basically. It's kind of like a market conditions element for the solar. That part they updated as well. Then you have your questionnaire instructions. This tells them how to fill it out and why, what the buyer should be looking for, what the seller needs to be disclosing. And then questionnaire paragraphs 1, 2, and 3. So this page up here, or the bottom of page 2, this applies to all types of solar power systems. Doesn't matter. If you have solar, regardless of what type, you're filling out sections 1, 2, and 3. Then section 4 and section 5, you would check which ones apply. So section 4, you would check if the power system is owned. And 5, you would check if it's leased or if you have a power purchase agreement. So for me personally, my own property, we purchased our solar system, and then we upgraded our kitchen to all electrical appliances, and we bought 2 electric cars, and we needed a lot more solar panels. So now we also have a power purchase agreement for additional panels. So we would check both boxes and fill out both bits of information here. But it can be one or the other, whichever one applies. Just make sure one or both boxes are checked. Okay. Is the receipt for reports required? It is not. That is another CYA form. It's always best to have things in writing, and also to kind of keep things organized of what has been delivered. So it's helpful, but it's not required. SWPI, for the life of me cannot figure out what the I stands for, but this is if you have septic, a well, a property monument, or propane tank on the property. Please remember, this is an addendum. This is not a disclosure. This is an addendum. You are adding terms to the contract. Therefore, it needs to be provided while you're negotiating the contract. So if you receive an offer on your listing and this document, maybe it's checked, but it's not included, you need to have this document included if any of these items apply on the transaction. Because you're saying who's going to pay for it? Who's responsible for the inspecting part of it? Who's responsible for the cost part of it? These all need to be negotiated. So keep in mind, this is an addendum. But they did update it saying that clarification anywhere that the seller is selected. So if the seller is paying for the inspection, the seller's paying for certification, the seller's paying for testing, anywhere that the seller is selected, the seller is required to deliver those elements according to the time specified in 3N of the purchase agreement, which is the time required for seller to provide all documentation. And a quick reminder to everybody, that is 7 days from acceptance. Seller delivery of documents, 7 days after acceptance. So you can see how this would cause a big issue if your seller has to do all of this stuff and they have 7 days to get it done and provide the report to the buyer. Please keep that in mind when you're receiving or negotiating the terms of the contract and what you have and what applies to your transaction and what is reasonable so that you're not right away in default or in breach of contract because you weren't doing the dates properly. If the buyer is the one that's paying, then the buyer will act diligently in good faith to facilitate the completion of items that are selected. So the buyer, can kind of do it within a reasonable amount of time as best they can. But the seller has to abide by those timeframes. So keep that in mind. Counteroffers, all the counteroffers were updated. It's a tiny little sentence at the very end, but gives clarification on this concept of late acceptance. So basically, the concept of late acceptance was added 2 updates ago, I believe, because they wanted a way for, things happen, delays happen. Typically, the seller would send a counteroffer. Then maybe the buyer would accept it, but then it wouldn't get delivered back to the seller for another couple of days because for whatever reason. And technically, that buyer's acceptance has maybe expired. And so, but the seller and the buyer are like, look, we don't want to rewrite this whole thing all over again or start all over again. We're good with just continuing on. And previously, you would just go about the transaction and be like, nope, we're good. We're all moving forward. So they provided this section 6 to be like for the seller to say, nope, we're good. We know the buyer signed late. We know it started late, but we're good. We're signing off on it. This one sentence now clarifies all time periods in this agreement shall now begin upon delivery of this late acceptance. So now your binding acceptance date is no longer when the buyer signs the seller counter and delivers it. It's now when the seller signs and delivers acceptance of their late acceptance. That's when your start timeframes begin. So again, it's really important that you keep in mind and understand how all of these are related to each other when you're in the process of negotiating. It's really easy to want to rush through, get acceptance as soon as possible, not pay attention to some of these little elements or tiny little sentences that get added that readjust everybody's understanding and time frames for a transaction. One other thing that I'll point out in the counteroffer that gets missed a lot um, is there are two elements in section 1A and 1B. 1A, liquidated damages and arbitration are not a part of the contract unless they are initialed by all parties. So if you receive, if you accept the seller counteroffer and then you get the purchase agreement back signed and the seller has not initialed liquidated damages and arbitration, it's not a part of the contract. So this clarifies, make sure that all parties are signing that. Otherwise, it's not incorporated. And the other one that's really big is 1B. Unless otherwise agreed or altered in a counteroffer, the down payment and the loan amount will be adjusted in the same proportions as the original offer. But the dollar amount of any initial and increased deposit or seller credits shall remain unchanged. The reason they have that in there is because they added this like helpful visual feature of percentage of purchase price. So when you're talking about the loan amount and the balance of the down payment amount, if your price changes in a counteroffer, if you change it from 500,000 to 550, the loan amount is going to, that percentage is going to be adjusted. But your initial deposit amount, if that was 10,000 and the purchase price goes up, it's still 10,000 unless it's written into the counteroffer, initial deposit to be 3%, initial deposit to be 15,000, what have you. So it's really important. People skip through all of this default terminology, but these are three terms automatically added into every counteroffer. Okay, and then the wildfire disaster advisory just updated information or a warning to the buyer that failure to bring the property into compliance could have consequences if they try to resell it or if the government comes and does an inspection. So like if they don't clear the area and they said they were going to, they could get in trouble. Or if their insurance carrier, they just added that information in there. Again, this is not a required form statutorily. It's not a statutory form, but it is a broker required form because all of California is a tinderbox and it's always better to have this information provided than to not. The second to last one we'll talk about is this other brand new form, the second one. This only applies for properties in these zip codes. This is for specifically for the Palisades and Altadena fires from last year. The requirement for this document, the law that it's associated with, expires January 1st of next year. So only for this year, if you are doing a transaction on a property that falls under any of those zip codes listed up here, this is a form that must be signed by the buyer and the seller before the transfer of title. The buyer has to record this form with the deed. If it turns out that the seller received an unsolicited offer, the agent could be subject to DRE discipline if they're the ones that made the offer for themselves or on behalf of someone else. Penalties could be a $1,000 fine, 6 months in prison, $25,000 civil penalty. So very serious. Please take note if you do business in any of those areas in Southern California, any of those zip codes, you will need to utilize this form for this next year. And then our final document is the multiple listing service addendum. This gets bundled with your listing document or your listing agreement. Talks about essentially when you're listing the property onto the MLS. They've added these additional options. So when you're talking about marketing the property, you can now agree that whichever marketing option you're selecting down here will go into effect either on a specific date. Well, the default is that it goes into effect the beginning of the listing period. And the default is that it's full exposure. Or you can check a box and specify a specific date for when the marketing option goes into effect. Or you can check a box and fill out whatever other situation may apply. That could be after the holidays. That could be after the new garage door gets installed. That could be after we receive the final permit sign off. Whatever the case is, if it's a more fluid time frame, you can check that box and apply that. And then it would either be full exposure or delayed or limited marketing exposure, coming soon exposure, or exclusive office exposure. That means you're only marketing within the Alta office. They've also added an option within that office exclusive exposure to say you're going to be exclusive within your office for until this date, and then it will revert to full exposure for marketing. So if you just want to release your new listing to all of your Alta agents for, let's say, 2 weeks, and then after that 2 week date, then it goes on to full MLS and full exposure and so on and so forth. So you now have that option to do that as well. I went way over my time. We covered a ton of stuff. Those are the main things that I have for you guys today. Does anybody have any other questions or anything that is jumping out at them that I can cover or questions to answer?
Doesn't look that way, but you guys, you can always contact Lauren and you can always ask and we can put you in contact with Lauren. But Lauren, that was very informative and really thorough, and we need that. So thank you very much. We really appreciate it.
You are very welcome. I'm always happy to be invited onto these webinars. I appreciate it.
Heck yeah. So, you guys, let's thank Lauren and make sure that you guys take this stuff to heart. I'm going to be putting this replay out probably tomorrow. So, really good one to go back. And of course, you can fast forward through things and get to, parts that you may want some more clarification on. But Lauren, thank you very much. We appreciate it.
You are very welcome. Have a great day, everybody.
Okay, guys, get out there and make it a great day, a great week, and we'll see you guys on the Wednesday webinar next week. Bye bye.